Recording in progress.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to actually dial in separately as a just in case.
Morning, Julie.
Good morning. I'm going to dial in here and see if this works. Bear with me.
Good morning.
Okay, Maria, I'm doing a new audio check. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Great, perfect. Just gonna make sure that that works, and then I'm gonna do my share screen here. Just getting all my logistics here figured out. And for those that are participants, just bear with us for a moment, please. Okay, great. Hi, Jim, how are you today?
So for some reason, it looks like there's two Jims. We logged in with Jim's login, and so me and Elton are showing as Jim. He's on vacation.
It's all part of the fun, so we're
Yeah.
glad to have you.
I saw Jim in here, and I was like, oh, Jim's here. And then I'm like, wait a minute, it's me.
It's all part of the fun. Let's see here. And then Maria, is it you or is it Donna who are going to be doing the hosting aspect of the presentation?
I believe it's Donna.
Yep, I'm here.
Great.
It's me. I'm
Oh,
just
very good. I thought you were ignoring me.
logged in as the SWAPTA.
No worries. Donna,
Yes,
can you help me
I'd like
confirm?
to-
Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
And did you see the screen advance there as well?
Yep.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'll just go ahead and stop sharing for now as well.
Hello.
Hi, Tony.
Hey, how are you?
Good, thank you. Just letting everybody know we're still got a couple minutes. We'll get everybody a chance to get logged in and then we'll get started. And Donna, just to confirm, will the chat box be open throughout the presentation as well?
Yes, the chat box will be open and I'll monitor it in case there's questions.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Elton. I just want to make sure if anybody can hear me.
We can hear you. I think we saw you a few minutes ago too.
All right, thank you.
No problem. Thank you for joining us today. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. We're still a couple minutes early, so. Donna, do we not get the advantage of having you on screen as well today, being the host?
I was just working on that. Here I am.
Nice, thank you.
You're
We don't want to
welcome.
feel alone.
Yes, sorry, I had a little bit of a crazy morning. We have, as you know, our city council meeting tonight, so been running around, but here I am.
Glad to have you. And just as everybody's getting connected, we're going to just give it a couple more moments to let more folks get tagged in here. Seeing lots of familiar names and faces. Oh, and look, there's Darby as well. So we see quite a few more names popping up, so we'll just give it another moment or two to allow everybody to get connected. Donna, what's the weather like in Paso Robles today?
You know, it is a little chilly this morning, but it is supposed to be sunny and 75 degrees. The usual weather in Paso.
You look bundled up. Darby, what
Oh.
about Flagstaff? How's it going over in Flagstaff?
It is like 60 degrees, so it's beautiful.
Nice.
Low windy, but it's for March in Flagstaff, I'll take it.
Yeah, it can be a range, I would imagine. You can still get snow, can't you?
Yeah, like Sunday, we will, and all last
Oh.
week. What about you?
It's a good question. I haven't been outside yet today. It's 60 degrees, but the sun is shining. blue skies here in San Diego. So
Nice. How are you muted? Or your microphone is like red and we can hear you.
because I dialed in just to ensure that I didn't have any audio or computer challenges, and I did not have the passcode. So it's the magic of Zoom. So my 213 number there is lit up, and that is where the audio is coming from. So
Oh.
yeah.
'Cause
So
you're
the only thing I
fancy.
didn't do is connect the dots on the two. I wasn't expecting as many people to dial in as early as they did, so I didn't want to have to belabor that connection. But Donna, I'm going to throw the floor back over to you if you want, since it looks like we've got a majority in attendance.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. I'm super excited to hear Julie with her procurement webinar this morning. Julie Dixon will be presenting for us and generally doesn't need any introduction. As you know, Julie Dixon is the president of our SWAPTA organization. She has been in the parking industry for a very long time. I think the last bio I saw is about 30 years. She helps all of our municipalities, airports, any agency, and knows pretty much everything about parking. So with that, I will let Julie present on procurement.
Thank you so much, Donna, and thank you to everybody who's participating here today. I see many familiar faces, and I just wanted to make sure that this is definitely intended to be an interactive conversation. So what I would suggest, if you all want to use the chat box as we're going through, I know that Donna and our fellow SWAPTA board members will help keep an eye on that chat box. And I think because I see several vendors who have also participated, I do want to highlight the fact that we actually have a few active procurements that are on the street. So I do want to be sensitive to that procurement process. So if there's any direct questions about specific procurement, I might have to dissuade some of those just to ensure no undue influence or anything like that. But again, I think we should be able to work our way through this conversation. And as I'm sharing my screen, I wanted to share with you all that I have been working with municipal procurements basically throughout my entire career. And I actually lost count at how many procurements we've been involved with. And I think for those of you who aren't familiar with my background, it really stems back to especially when we help support the SF Park program. For those of you who aren't familiar with SF Park, I would be surprised that if you didn't know what that was, but SF Park was the first program that was federally funded that focused on congestion mitigation as it relates to on and off street parking. It's actually where I met a lot of the vendors from this industry, because it basically became a $56 million sandbox where if you had a widget, a service, or a technology that you thought could help mitigate parking issues, you basically had to go through myself and the company that I worked for at the time in order to work on that project. At that time, we ran over 60 procurements for the city and county of San Francisco, ranging from things as small as a $10,000 value to an $8 million value and everywhere in between. And so I like to explain that that's really kind of where I cut my teeth on municipal procurement. But having worked in municipal government my entire career, I've had to write them, I've had to respond to them, and everything in between. And so we wanted to share some of that experience. And one of the things that came out of the SWAPTA board is really asking about how do I know what I need to do? And that's really where this conversation has really stemmed from. And some of you that have attended presentations like this in the past, I think you'll find that there's a lot of refreshers in here. And we really do try to take the approach from both the vendor respondent as well as the agency who is considering. So Donna already gave a really great introduction and presentation. And for those of you who don't know, I do work for Dixon Resources Unlimited. We're celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. And again, our company focus is really helping make parking easy, convenient, and accessible, and helping agencies across the country. And we do work a lot in municipal procurement. And so when it comes down to trying to figure out what you need to do, one of the first conversations that we often have with the agencies that we work with, and it's something that we provide a lot of coaching for, and I will tell you this, my contact information will be available at the end of this presentation. And I encourage everyone, if you have questions, please don't ever be shy to ask. If I have the answer, I'm always happy to provide it, but if I can also provide you with a referral, always happy to do that as well. I'm a big believer in being able to have information out there consistently and available, and to be able to share as much as possible, I think is important, because we're all heading towards that same mission. And I think that it's really important that we all collaborate with each other as we talk about our agency's needs. So I think it's important when you're starting to talk about a parking solution is that you really have to understand what is not only your current mission, but most importantly, your future mission. I think we can all appreciate that the pandemic has taught us the importance of being adaptive, and the fact that we can go from 100 to 0 overnight. And in some cases, programs can go from 0 to 100 overnight. We never know what the next big Uber, micromobility scooters, what that impact is going to be, the next big restaurant or hotspot that's really going to create that demand. And so I think it's really important when we talk about what I call future-proofing our parking solutions, is that you really need to have this conversation with yourself and your team. One of the first things when we're basically developing a municipal or agency procurement is to sit down with the team and really understand what your project goals are. And I think that it's something that, for those of you who know me, you know I'm not a real huggy, touchy kind of person. It's not really my repertoire. But I do think it's really important that you sit down and you really write down your mission statement, really understanding the objective and the goals of the projects that you're investing in, and really understanding what the path is going to be required to get there. One of the things I think we can all appreciate is that technology is evolving at a pace today that's really difficult to keep up with. I think many of you are currently going through the experience where our 3G modems are expiring. And for those of you that already went through this before with our 1G and our 2G technology as well, these are all factors that, again, just like our cell phones that some of us are probably changing out every year, this is really starting to have implications in the parking management world. For those of you that have been in the industry for as long as I have, we can all appreciate the fact that before we started to utilize smart technology, we traditionally relied upon the traveling parking salesperson that would come through town, once every 5 to 7 years and sell us whatever the new widget was or whatever the new replacement equipment was, or upgrade our signage. And that was really the parking experience of the past. That is no more. When we talk about ongoing engagement with our customers, the customer touch point, and really the impacts of parking management in our communities, we're now looking at strategic partners. When we talk about being able to provide those service providers, whether it be an operator, whether it be a mobile payment provider, whether it be a hardware infrastructure provider, I think it's really important when we talk about those relationships, it's definitely transitioned into that ongoing engagement and making sure that you're picking that right fit vendor. We'll talk a bit today about best value compared to low price, but I also like to talk about strategic partnerships, and the fact that you want to be sure that you're picking that solution provider that's going to be adaptive and basically grow with your agency's needs. And I always like to talk about the end user experience. For many, the end user is the focus on the customer and the persons who are going to be utilizing whatever system or solution you're soliciting. But what we also can't think about is the end user, can't forget about is the end user that could be your maintenance staff, your personnel, your finance, your administration, your customer service folks, the people that answer the 311 calls. Those are the folks too that I think is really important when we talk about the end user experience. We really need to think about all of the touch points that the systems or solutions that you're soliciting have, and basically where those interfaces are, because those are the places that we really have to think about the upkeep, maintenance, and maintaining the system and solution when you're really talking about making that right strategy decision for your agency. I mentioned the communications or the modems that are expiring currently as we speak. So understanding what that refresh impact is on the investments that you're making, oftentimes you're investing in some cases millions of dollars, and you really need to be strategic about those investments to make sure of how long this equipment is going to last you and basically what the updates and upgrades are going to require. I like to use the example of San Francisco because back in 2002, the city did a solicitation and procurement where they replaced all of the on-street parking infrastructure citywide. It was a massive update, a massive implementation process. But what's really important about that particular example is that come 7 years later, everything basically had to be replaced at the same time. And it's one of the things that I like to consider when we talk about an incremental approach to the project, is making sure that you're strategically aligning your decisions so that you're not having to do everything at once. We've worked with some agencies where their citation permit contracts expired at the same time as all of their paid parking infrastructure, as well as their parking operator solicitations. And you can all appreciate when you have to run an agency-wide procurement, the impacts that it can have to not run just one, but think about having to run 3 to 6 of those types of engagements simultaneous. So being able to strategically lay out that timeline for when those procurements occur is something that you're also doing it for your own sanity, for that matter, because I think we can all appreciate the investment in time and resources that are required to run those types of solicitations and engagements. And again, we want to make sure that we are successful in our efforts. And if you're running more than one procurement at a time, not only is it a heavy lift, you want to make sure that you're also aligning your efforts so that you're making that best decision for your agency. So ideally, that type of phased approach is something that we highly encourage you being able to do. In some cases, that agency that I described, we were able to strategically align so that a couple of the existing contracts received extensions while the agency focused on those that had the most immediate impact on the operation, rather than being able to create that distraction of having to do everything at one time. I think it's important when we talk about personnel, resources, and allocation. Again, oftentimes it's just you. And I think we all can forget about the fact of the impact that that can have in the operation as well. So I have a question in the chat that says, can you speak to how to know what type of platform unified or multi-vendor benefits can provide, and how to determine the best solution that you need? So this is a really great question. And for those of you that are in the vendor side of things, there's a couple of solicitations that have posted over this last year where it's been multi-component based, where in the case of a recent solicitation that was posted, component A of the solicitation included citation, permit management, and LPR, and component B included paid parking infrastructure, including mobile payment. And the solicitation was basically posted so that the respondents could respond to either component A or component B, or reply to both. And in that particular case, it basically allows the vendors to come up with best-in-class solutions and basically either stay in their lane of component A or component B, or to come in from a prime contractor perspective and bid it all. And when you bid it all, oftentimes there's sometimes discounts associated with those services because you're allocating everything that's tied into there. But those are the decision points that I think you're going to see more and more solicitations coming out, where you can strategically align yourself with the appropriate partners. But I'm going to come back on prime contractor because I think you're going to see more prevalence shifted towards a prime contractor approach for solicitations as we see more limited resources coming into our parking management programs through the various agencies. But the multi-platform solicitation and having, and I'm going to use the term that some might find offensive, but it's very commonplace, is the one throat to choke mentality of a prime contractor. What's happened now is that some cities and agencies are so spread out with their management of parking resources that they're finding it difficult to manage multiple vendor solutions. And so by taking this prime contractor approach and having one point of contact that manages the details of the operation has really proven to be a more efficient and effective model for many agencies. So I think that that's something when we talk about multiple vendors, is that we are starting to see a shift back towards a prime contractor model that still can allow an agency to have a multitude of vendors, but just manage through one point of contact versus having a multitude of vendors that the parking department for an agency has to manage. We'll talk a bit more about that as we get through the presentation as well. So getting into the next slide, we always like to talk about really understanding the problem. Like I mentioned at the very onset of the program, not only defining the objective of the project, but really understanding what the needs are. We go through an exercise that really gets down to the root of the problem, where we rip all the Band-Aids off, because I think we can all appreciate that we use the joke that, oh, there's a problem, put in a new meter, or create a permit rule, whatever the case may be. And where we've just developed layer upon layer upon layer of solutions that don't necessarily get to the root cause of the problem. And we just obviously chase the issue to one place to another. And we get to a position where we're basically reacting to the need rather than being proactive. And I think it's really important as we get down to the root cause and understanding what the operational needs are for the program, that we really want to address the problem. Now, this is important too, because I think we can all appreciate the quick fix. Oftentimes an answer is needed. Somebody wants the solution, let's get it done, make it happen, but it's not necessarily driving or influencing the solution. And we really want to get everyone to a position where you can take that blip for a moment so that you can really focus on what is the solution that is right for my agency. And most importantly, and I know I end up sounding like a broken record when we talk about making data-driven decisions, I think we can all appreciate all of the different perspectives and opinions associated with parking. And the fact is that we want to be sure that we take the perceptions out and talk about data so that we can work on facts rather than working on opinions. And obviously, always focusing on the customer service approach to parking. One of the things you'll often hear me talk about is the importance of parking being synonymous with customer service. And it's something that I think is really, really important when we talk about projects moving forward and making sure that we're treating parking as a customer service extension of the agency. And I see Peter's put some comments in there about prime contractor, and we will get into prime contractor in more detail as well. So we wrote here, homework is important. I know most of us probably didn't enjoy homework in the past lives, but the fact is this is an important aspect. And mind you, this is before we put pen to paper and started to write any type of solicitation, because you gotta basically check the boxes. It's really important not only to really, again, get down to the brass tacks of what your needs are, but it's also important to reach out to others around you. For those of you who've heard me speak about this before, it's the time that I like to say plagiarism in procurement is appreciated and acknowledged and necessary, because anytime that you can reach out to those around you and learn from their experience, most importantly, taking a recent solicitation that an agency has issued and speaking to them and asking them, what would you do differently if you could rewrite that solicitation? What would you change in the documentation? And then leveraging those details into your particular procurement, we think is really essential, because oftentimes I'll run a procurement and I'll come back and go, gosh, I definitely figured something else out that I can do differently. And I think each time that we issue a new procurement, being able to apply those lessons learned. And the one thing I think we can all appreciate is there's no perfect procurement that's out there. And so being able to leverage that experience from others so that we can incorporate that into the specifications that we utilize is really important. It's also important to understand when you really define your own internal priorities and needs is to, again, compare that to others and understanding, what has worked for them. I also like to talk about the language that we speak, is making sure that the language that we're using in our solicitation and our needs assessment is consistent with the understandings of others around us. I highly encourage having a definitions page in your solicitations. I always use the term dynamic pricing as a great example of what dynamic pricing means to me versus what it means to Donna versus what it means to Darby. We could have three completely different definitions. And I think it's really important that you need to define the terminology that you're going to be using in your solicitation to make sure that there's consistency in the understanding from those that are going to respond to it. It's also important that you be sure that you know who is your best resource when it comes to these processes and making sure that you have the knowledge for what it is that you're soliciting. Reaching out to experts throughout the industry in advance of a solicitation is something that we really do encourage, is making sure that there's, and forgive me, there is a random dog running around in my yard that my dogs are not appreciating, so forgive the barking in the background. This is our real world environment. Hopefully the owner finds that dog. But being sure to understand what it is that you're soliciting. Oftentimes we'll have cities that'll say, or an agency that'll say, you know, I need this magic elixir that's gonna fix, you know, all my world's problems when it comes to data management or paid parking technology, and not really understanding what that means. I think we can all appreciate going to a parking conference, walking the trade show, or reaching out to vendors in advance to get a better understanding of how things work, how they interconnect. Doing your homework in advance to have that understanding is something that we think is really advantageous to the process. Maria says, how do you feel about hiring a consultant, and is it important or necessary? Especially if you're looking for the first time for paid parking operations and new technology, what are your thoughts? Great question. Obviously, I love when you hire a consultant, but I don't think it's always required. I do think that there's a number of resources that are out there that you can do this yourself. And I think that there's plenty of resources where you can call folks and ask them. The other thing that's also important is the technology partners that you're seeking out will also provide you with support and guidance. One of the things that I think is really important is to be mindful when someone provides you with a technical specification for a solicitation that you're interested in looking or interested in soliciting, be sure that you review that technical spec. I think it's more of a thing of the past where folks will give you a specification that is so specific to their technology that it basically makes it non-competitive. My hope is that people don't do that any longer. But that's why I always recommend being able to leverage other municipal specifications and then taking those lessons learned. So I think it can be done. The one thing that's really important is to read and understand the materials that you're going to be using. And I know it can be tedious and it can be a significant investment to have to continually review that documentation. I can't tell you, my eyes sometimes blur out looking at specifications over and over again. But I think as vendors, a lot of us can appreciate how many times specifications come out that they're literally just a cut and paste from another agency, and seeing that other agency's name or that other agency's banking requirements built into that specification is demonstrative of people not doing their homework. So can you do it yourself? Absolutely. And I think that there's plenty of resources and tools and guidance resources that are out there. I think that the more complex that you get, that's where the consultancies often can help. But I also think that there's an opportunity from a guidance and coaching perspective where you can still do the majority of work yourself. So I think that it really depends upon the need, and more importantly, the resources that you have and also the timing. And I think that that's probably one of the factors that affects most agencies, is that the timing is one that they're so compressed that they have to get it done overnight. And it's oftentimes that resource that they don't have to be able to do that. And I think that that's oftentimes where you'll see outside resources coming in. And so to that point, I think that we all can appreciate how complex parking is, but people on the outside don't realize that, because I think all of us just make it look easy. And it's interesting when you start to work with an agency that maybe is new to some of the parking management details. And oftentimes what I hear is, wow, it's so complicated. And I often think about the fact that people just don't realize what's behind the curtain. And again, I commend all of you, because the fact is, you all make it look easy to everyone. But I think that when you really, again, peek behind the curtain and recognize all of the levels and layers that go into our program and our operations, and most importantly, how many aspects of our community that parking touches, is something that I think is often an oversight of many agencies. And I think that I like to jokingly say that we're all parking evangelists, because part of our job is to get out there and spread the message, spread the word, and make sure that we, again, focus on parking being that customer service extension of our agency. And it's really up to each of us to help educate and inform everybody about the complexities and why these solutions are so important. And I just listed just a handful of items from that complexities, but when you think about solicitations and realizing the personnel or ongoing support services that may be necessary, even if you're going to outsource to an operator, somebody still has to manage that operator. You don't just get to hand the whole enchilada out, obviously, unless you're doing a concession model or a PPP, a public-private partnership. But even in that case, somebody has to mind the store and somebody has to keep an eye on the finances. So when you think about a comprehensive parking solicitation or solution, it's really important that you've got to really check all the boxes and cover all the bases. And when you really talk about that customer experience, whether it be your own or whether it be the general public, again, making parking easy, convenient, and accessible is always the focus of that process. But how are we going to maintain and upkeep the system? Some of the worst things that I see on the daily is people that make a multi-million-dollar investment and then forget it because, you know, they've made the investment, now we're good. I can't tell you how many places have built those parking garages that so many desire and then never power wash it, never wipe down the signs, factors like that. And I know we can all appreciate the impact on our assets that that has. And so when you talk about developing these solutions, making sure that when we talk about future-proofing them, making sure that you're allocating the proper resources to ensure preventative maintenance and ongoing support so that you are ready for if and when 5G expires or if and when, you know, the next touchless credit card system comes out. Those are all factors that you need to keep in mind. And mind you, we haven't even gotten into PCI certifications and things like that, which we will in just a moment. So when we talk about sustainable solutions, I think we can all appreciate having to justify our expenditures. We need to make sure that we're coming up with recommendations that are going to pay for themselves. And ideally, if it's a program that is intended to generate revenue, being able to identify those resources and provide those forecasts and projections. I think that's very important for the majority of agencies as you bring these recommendations forward. Being able to identify the oversight and management, again, just installing it and forgetting about it is not ideal. For those of you who've heard me speak in the past, I've told the story where there was a parking pay station that hadn't reported in 6 months. We went out and checked on it and the pay station wasn't there. So when we talk about accountability and oversight, there is still a level of human engagement that's required, a level of management and maintenance support that is necessary to make sure that we provide that ongoing management of the program. When we talk about the impacts of technology, there's a lot of efficiencies that come as a result, but again, we can't overlook the importance of maintenance and support. And I highlight that because oftentimes the allocations for the infrastructure on these agency solicitations are identified, but not necessarily the personnel or staffing necessary to support that program. So keeping that in mind is that you can't just talk about the hardware that needs to be purchased or the ongoing software licensing, but also the upkeep and maintenance and management. And that's often an oversight of most agencies. And I think we can all appreciate most of our agencies are not fully automated. So the fact is there is still human intervention that is required in our operations. And that's something that just because you install a license plate recognition technology doesn't mean you don't need parking enforcement officers anymore. I think that's probably one of the most common misconceptions that we come across. I mentioned this before, but only because it's so important, making data-driven decisions and making sure that you're monitoring the data. Oftentimes we get to a place where we have all of these amazing parking management systems. The data platforms that these parking technology providers can provide are really unbelievable. But the fact is that oftentimes we'll come into audit a program and staff doesn't even look at the data management systems. And so I think it's important when you talk about the simplification of those packages and making sure it's easy to use, are things that even when it's intuitive, it's not necessary that people are looking at it. And so I think as parking managers and administration, you all need to make sure that you recognize the value of the data and that you actually look at it, because that can influence policy, that can influence change in your operations. And most important, when you're trying to figure out the solution that you need, you sat down, you figured out your needs assessment, you've talked to all of the staff, and you've all identified that path. You need to make sure that you're engaging your community and having transparent conversations, because you need them to be a part of it. Nothing is worse than you going through a years-long effort of needs assessment, getting through the procurement, selecting your technology providers, and then coming to council and finding out that your community is completely against the decisions that you've made. And so having your community be a part of that conversation, be a part of that needs assessment, and having them really in the boat as you're floating down the river is an important part of this process to ensure the success and longevity and sustainability of your program. So we included just a sampling of just a handful of different procurements. Honestly, I think this list could go on and on and on, but I think as parking managers, we can all appreciate the hardware implications. I do think that as a result of the pandemic, we're starting to see a shift to some more contactless payments. But one of the things that oftentimes I speak about across the country is the fact that when we do deal with public agencies, you have to basically be cognizant of equitability. And we do have to keep in mind that while the majority of the world is connected and has credit cards and mobile devices, not everyone does. So the ability to streamline to a completely contactless system, we need to be mindful of how do we address the unbanked? How do we address those that are unconnected? And just be aware of that so that we can promote what those solutions are. And I know that vendors have identified solutions for that. We just have to make sure that for public agencies, that those adaptive approaches are going to work for them. I think that the one thing that comes out of all of these different items, and we'll talk about it here in a moment, is the significance and importance of integration. And I think this came up as a result of one of the questions Darby asked earlier. Back in the day, integrations were something that were very difficult. They cost a lot of money, and vendors charged agencies, they charged each other to make those integrations happen. And I'm proud to say that the majority of that is in the past. And so I think that the compatibility aspect of technology integration partners, that's something that you want to be sure that you're asking for upfront so that you can understand who they're already integrated with and then also who they can be integrated with. I think it's important to highlight the fact that IPMI has gotten behind the data standards, and I do encourage that you as agencies be sure that you refer to those integration standards, because the more consistency that we can have throughout the country and our solicitation efforts is really going to make a difference. And if you're working with a vendor who is not familiar with those types of solicitation integration requirements, I think it's important that you be mindful of that. And if somebody could please mute their chat, I think it'll be helpful. Thank you very much, appreciate it. So being sure that if you have a vendor that's not familiar with those data integration requirements, that's something that I think you should be considerate of as you're making those decisions. So we talked a little bit about prime contractors, but I also wanted to touch on a couple more details when we talk about coming through RFP versus sole source. And I just got a question on, what do you think about having integration requirements in the contract and a clear point of contact with one vendor? Big fan. I think the integration requirements should be included in the actual solicitation, because I always say, as forward as you can be on the anticipated path of your program. A great example is when we talk about future proofing, being able to identify your agency's roadmap in your solicitation is something that's important when we talk about having a clear roadmap and path for an adaptive solution. I think is really important. So we're big fans of including the integration requirements in your solicitation, as well as any future roadmap for that. And then being able to always provide your current roadmap of relationships with which vendors you currently have in play. And that's not just parking technology partners, your current finance systems, your current ITS systems, basically anything that you might have that might need to be connected to the parking program, and also future releases. A great example is maybe today I'm soliciting a citation management company, and maybe next year I'm going to be soliciting a new paid parking hardware technology or a mobile payment provider, being able to write that into my solicitation so that the vendor I'm selecting knows, not only do I have this partner today, but I anticipate having another partner in the coming year. You want them to build that into their model. And so getting into procurement considerations, I wanted to highlight, I mentioned earlier the term best value. I have to reinforce, and this is a fight that many agencies have to have with their procurement offices, is that low price should not be the consideration when you're talking about soliciting a parking management or technology provider in our current environment. We highly encourage best value. Price should be a factor, but it should not be the only factor. There's a couple faces on this presentation that can appreciate the fact that back in the day, when at Friday at noon, when they opened up the envelope and if whoever had the lowest price got the bid, again, that is a thing of the past. When we talk about the evolution of the relationships and that traveling salesperson that I described earlier, being sure that you're picking the best value is important. And one of the things that I like to highlight is that for me, the word change order is a dirty word. And we want to make sure that our comprehensive solicitations are so comprehensive that you're not going to have the issue of change order. And that's the reason why I'm a big fan of being able to future-proof and put that roadmap into your solicitation so that your partner is going to understand the path that you're on and that they're building those adaptations into the solicitation. So I want to mention sole source and cooperatives. So oftentimes there's opportunities to be able to what we call piggyback, which is leveraging a recent contract issuance or a recent procurement effort and being able to leverage that contract to be able to write a contract for your agency off of that. There's also national cooperatives that have basically run procurements that technology vendors have qualified for and service vendors, and you can actually leverage that national cooperative to be able to sign a contract through your agency. Now, when should a cooperative or a piggybacking agreement be utilized? This can be utilized when you've done your homework, you've gone out, you've evaluated the technology providers, and you figured out the path that really works for you. And that can be one of the opportunities to leverage that approach. Sole source awards, I will tell you, are more of a rarity. They do happen, but you have to be able to provide the justification for why you need to sole source award a project. And oftentimes that was common in the past because there were more unique solutions where there wasn't a lot of competition in the industry. But these days, I haven't really experienced where that lack of competition exists. Bear with me one second. Sorry about that. So I think that the opportunity for a sole source award is something that you've really got to interrogate and make sure it's the best solution for your agency. Now, pilots and trials, are something that is always a benefit to your agency. Sometimes vendors will provide free demonstrations, sometimes 30-day trials. But I think that because of the prevalence of the technology and infrastructure that's out there in the field, you're finding that more doing site visits to other locations to see demonstrations of the technology, I think, are becoming more prevalent. But the opportunity to take it for a test drive is something that is always ideal and recommended, and you can always ask. It's just something that I want to be mindful of. You might still have to run a solicitation at the end of that, and that's going to be something that you really need to be clear and upfront of with the partners that you basically work with, is that being able to run a trial doesn't necessarily guarantee you a contract as a result of it, and that's something on both sides. You want to make sure that expectations are really clear. And this goes back to Darby's question from earlier about turnkey solutions, is that being able to take that prime contractor role. So a prime contractor, again, is the example of where there's one party that is basically the responsible party for the program or the solicitation in whole. They could bring a whole string of partners that could be DVEs or various participating factors that can be a part of it. But ultimately, that vendor is the point of contact, and they're the ones that are responsible for the financial integrity, the performance, the everything, the one-stop shop for the operation. But I do want to highlight that you often do pay a premium for that role and that support. You're going to pay for that project management, that oversight, that financial risk associated with that turnkey service. But there are also that prime contractor role from that PM side. There's also vendors that provide the all-in-one solution where they provide the park system, the citation system, the paid parking system. They can provide all of those widgets that are a part of it. But this is something that in the past too, that decision that your agency has to make of, are you putting all of your eggs in one basket and does that work for you as an agency? And I'll tell you, this can be debated probably for the next hour, and we probably won't come to a resolution on it because it's about what works for your agency. And it's something that's really important to have those conversations when you're doing that homework to determine what works best for you and to speak to other agencies that are doing it. And again, finding out the lessons learned, what worked for them versus what didn't work for them. When we talk about the API, it's really about the integrations and making sure, again, publishing those standards with a part of the solicitation is really important. And this is the part that I really like to spend just a few minutes on, and I know we've got about 15 minutes left here plus, is performance standards. Now, sometimes called liquidated damages, sometimes called credit assessments. I won't name the city, but sometimes when they put out solicitations, the specification is this thick and the credit assessments are just as thick. There's a credit assessment or a liquidated damage for every single spec that goes out there. Now, one of the things that's important about a specification like that is you as the agency are going to see that reflected in your bottom line price for that particular solicitation. And is it wrong to have a spec or a standard for every single item? Not necessarily, but one of the things that we like to do when we do that needs assessment, when we do our homework, is we sit down and we talk to you as the agency and say, what are the must-haves? Give me that top 5 or that top 10 list of things that if this breaks, it is going to impact your operation. If this breaks or doesn't work, this is going to affect our finances. So we come up with that top 10 items, and then we basically look at really kind of compacting those into the standards or measures that are going to be part of the ongoing agreement. Those should be included in the solicitation because, again, you're telling the proposers, this is what is important, the must-haves of my solicitation and what I expect for the sustainable solution of my operation, so that they can also price that accordingly. And by narrowing the focus of what those performance standards are, again, it's understanding the prioritization of what are the must-haves, the must-dos of my program. And again, that can vary by the solicitation, by the support that's being requested, but it's something that I always like to say, being able to really focus on that is really an important part of that, and having that be a part of the solicitation. One thing that's not on here either, but I want to highlight is in your draft specification, in your procurement, is to make sure that you're including a draft contract agreement, typically the agency standard, and making sure that you mandate during the solicitation process that the respondents have to identify any exceptions to the spec or to the contract standard and require that they put that into the exemptions response of their proposal response. Nothing is worse than when two companies bid a project and ultimately vendor B puts all of their exemptions in, vendor A puts no exemptions in, vendor A gets selected, and then at the contract table, they're able to negotiate in all of their exemptions. Honestly, that is just a program that's becoming ripe for protest, because the fact is vendor B was forthcoming in their response, vendor A was not, and ultimately vendor A won the project and was able to renegotiate the terms of the agreement. And those are details that you want to be mindful of, because ultimately a protest to your procurement process can not only extend the procurement process just for an indefinite amount of time, it's going to cost you money, it's going to impact your deliverables, and your whole schedule is basically going to be out the window. And I think there's some legendary protests that have happened in our industry that have caused delays of years plus to our process. So just to be mindful of that. We talked a little bit about engagement already, but I also think it's important that we talked about the community having staff and admin involved, but what we haven't talked about is the politics. And I think it's something that we can all appreciate in all of our agencies. The politics of it, I don't need to get in and get into the drama by any means. But the fact is, you need to shape those around you, above you and under you and on the sides of you to make sure that they're ready for whatever your approach is going to be, and making sure that you're having those transparent conversations, because that feedback is also critical, because nothing is worse than you go through this whole year-long effort, you've got your selected vendor, and then you get before your commission, your council, your community, whatever the decision party is of your agency, and ultimately they give you the thumbs down. And that can happen, it has happened, and that's why it's really important that you get out there and shape the messaging when it comes to preparation for these decisions. So this is one of my favorite flow charts. I like to share it because when you talk about the incremental steps as you go through this process, everything that I've talked about to date has just been preparing you for writing the specification and the things that you need to be cognizant of. Defining those objectives we know is really important. And when you get into the requirements portion of the solicitation, is really, again, making sure that you're writing something that can also be competitive with others. We've had a recent procurement that was issued where we didn't get any respondents. And so what we were able to do is now take that draft and ask the industry, okay, what do we need to do to change the specification to make it more competitive? And what we ended up finding out was that it was actually a regional issue of why folks didn't respond to it. And so we had to basically address that as the RFP is going to be addressed and re-released. So just to be cognizant of that is that to be sure that you're making something that is competitive and can be responded to by multiple parties, because we're trying to go through this process so that you can have options in front of you. So when you do talk about getting the solicitation out there, there's many different procurement opportunities to post your procurement. Most procurements, have moved to electronic bidding where everything is submitted online. One of the things that I also like to encourage is the opportunity to put page limits on your submissions. I jokingly have said in the past that we're looking for quality, not quantity. And for those that have been in the biz for a while, can appreciate those 4 and 5 inch binders that used to come through on bid submissions, and the opportunity for folks to, again, really be direct in their responses to you and making sure that the questions that you're asking are really going to address those objectives that you're trying to achieve. And most importantly, too, is when we talk about the scoring process, highly recommend that your evaluation criteria be included in your specification. You might be surprised to find out that not every specification has the pricing or the scoring included. And so again, you're letting the respondents know what is the priority of your evaluation. Is it price? Is it operational support? Is it experience? That scoring criteria is something that is really speaking to the proposers as to what is going to be important. I already mentioned the contract exceptions and how important that is, but you really have to make sure that you're cognizant of the potential for protest that could come up throughout this particular process. I talk about being modular, and this is something that when we talk about plug and play, is being able to be ready for whatever the next widget or the next great improvement in our industry is that you want to make sure that your system is ready for that. And again, having that partner in your selection that's going to be able to be adaptive to incorporate that. We touched on performance standards, but what we didn't talk about is warranty. You need to be sure that you're pricing out the warranty support and understanding what's included in the warranty. Is shipping included if there's hardware associated with it? And being mindful of the timeline of the responses associated with that. One of the most common performance standards that I think we've probably had to incorporate into solicitations over this last year has to do with response time from contractors in regards to how long it takes for a project manager to contact the agency back. And it's kind of a sad statement on us if the fact is that we're having to require that you have to call your customer back within 24 hours of notification. And so I only say that as a reminder to all of us, just the importance of that customer service touch point and making sure that we're recognizing the partnerships that we have with our customers. So getting into, we're almost here towards the end here. is a couple of things to remember is that off-the-shelf software, off-the-shelf hardware is great, but making sure that the systems and solutions can be customized for your agency's needs, not only for the current, but also for the future, making sure that you're cognizant of the integration impacts, and most importantly, that partnership that you're going to have with your vendors is something that is really important, whether as an operator, a software provider, or a service provider, or a hardware provider. Making sure you have that ongoing engagement and communication touch point is so important. And for those who have asked for a copy of the presentation, not a problem. In fact, they've also recorded this presentation, and it'll also be provided on our SPOCTA YouTube channel. So thank you for that. And then the real core of this is really, again, your missions and your values is making sure that you have those conversations, you have those discussions about what the needs are. And that's really where the heavy lift comes in. Once you have defined those objectives, writing the specification around that is something that's honestly the easier part of the process. Getting down to the core root of what you guys need is really where the heavy lift comes into play. And so with that, I thought I'd share just a couple of lessons learned from some different projects, and then we can take questions. And I see there's a couple more comments that Peter has put into the chat box. And so I'm going to look for some questions. And then while we're talking here at the end, I'm going to leave my contact information there up on the slide and see if we have any questions. I think I mentioned a couple of things where we have a couple of recent procurements now where we've had one where we didn't have any responses, and this was after 6 months worth of work. And it ended up being a regional issue, and that specification is being re-released after consult with the industry. One of the things that I always like to do, and I found that we haven't had as much permission from this in other procurements as of late, is I always like to take a draft specification and share that with the industry in advance of publication, especially if it's something that I think is unique or potentially complex, and asking for industry feedback to ensure that it's competitive with others. And I found that when we work with procurement departments, they're not always open to that particular process. The other thing that I always like to do, if feasible, is when I know that there's going to be a short time frame associated with the procurement, I ask for permission to prepare the industry for the upcoming release. And I think that many of the vendors on this call today can appreciate there have been some heavy lift solicitations with very short timeframes over this last couple of years. And it's difficult to respond in some cases with such short timeframes. And oftentimes it's the procurement rules as to why we can't alert folks, but also because it's taken so long in some cases for some agencies to put pen to paper for us to be able to get those solicitations posted as well. I wanted to take a moment and see if anyone had additional questions, and I'm just going to look here. I think Peter might have posted another question, or maybe it's more of a statement. Let's just see here if everybody can see in the chat. It says, with numerous vendors moving to SaaS pricing, software as a service pricing, it is very important that your price quotation requirements are clear in terms of how many years pricing you are asking for the vendor to quote, and clarifying that any software as a service pricing must be clearly and separately quoted. The great point that Peter brings up, and we didn't even get into the cost workbooks, but being able to have those definitive apples to apple pricing comparisons are so key. Making sure that you're asking for individual unit pricing as well as potentially tiered pricing, but most importantly, the terms associated with that and the length of time, we think is really essential. And always having that box that allows people to explain other pricing impacts or other units that may be inclusive in their pricing too is something that's important when you want to make that apples to apples comparison. Anybody else have any other questions? You're welcome to ask them aloud or in the chat. Thank you for that. Appreciate the excellent presentation. That's always nice. I apologize for the coughing and the dogs barking in the background. We can all appreciate working from home. I think that there's a couple of big solicitations that are going to be coming out here in the coming months, but I do think that the component-based solicitations are going to become more prevalent. And I will say, just from my personal perspective, that I think we're going to see more prime contractor type of solicitations where folks are soliciting and looking for one point of contact in the solicitation. And I would recommend to everyone to be sure to read the specification to ensure that you are compliant. If you're going to bid a specific component, make sure that you understand the requirements of that component and the fact that you have to bid all of the components under that header. So establishing those relationships and partnerships with the various partners in the industry is greatly appreciated. So with that, I'll do one last ask for questions. If not, my contact information is there on the slide. I think everybody can appreciate you're always available to answer questions, always happy to provide references and resources to everybody. And taking the line from my colleague Maria, I'll wish everybody a swaptastic day. I wanted to make sure everybody knows that the frontline training in Tucson is coming up in April. I believe it's on April 12th to be specific. And if you don't already have it on your calendar, we do have the SWAPTA annual conference in Las Vegas, October 24, 25, and 26. And we're really looking forward to seeing all of you. And we have some other great SWAPTA events that'll be coming up here throughout the remainder of the year. So I appreciate everybody's participation, and I will wish you again that swaptastic day. And thank you all for participating today. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you, Julie. That was awesome. Just so everyone knows as well, we take these recordings and they will be on our YouTube channel. So as soon as we can get the recording processed and put on YouTube, you'll be able to share it with your coworkers there. Have a great day.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks for recording. Bye, everybody.
Have a great day, guys.